for longer than recorded history dared to imagine, one name inspired dread across the stars: the Zarov. Not a race known for diplomacy or tolerance, they were conquerors, apex predators that treated the galaxy as their hunting ground. Their rise had not been sudden, it had been inevitable. With every world they claimed, with every species that fell beneath their clawed feet, the myth of Zarov invincibility grew stronger. And for the longest time, no one, not even the most desperate civilizations, dared to challenge it. They were terrifying to behold. Towering insectoid monstrosities, their bodies encased in shimmering black exoskeletons so dense and resilient that even military-grade kinetic rounds ricocheted off them like rubber balls. Their serrated mandibles weren't just for show, capable of shearing through reinforced steel. They had been documented slicing directly through starship hulls and battlefield tanks alike. Limbs layered in segmented armor gave them enhanced leverage and strength, allowing even their smallest soldiers to punch through concrete or rip apart barriers meant to withstand orbital bombardment. But brute strength was only a piece of what made the Zarov so deadly. What made them unstoppable was what everyone feared but few truly understood: their hive mind. The Zarov were connected not just by shared cause or ideology, but biologically, mentally. Every warrior, engineer, scout, and pilot was psychically tethered to the will of the Hive Empress. Her consciousness flowed through them like blood through veins, synchronizing movements, strategies, and responses with frightening precision. There were no delays, no internal debates, no hesitations. Orders were issued and followed instantly. 1,000 units could change tactics mid-battle with the elegance of a ballet. If one soldier learned an enemy's weakness, they all did. That efficiency alone had broken empires before the first shot was even fired. Their technology bordered on the divine. To most other species, it wasn't just advanced, it was incomprehensible. Hive ships the size of small moons prowled the void, their hulls grown rather than built. Covered in bioorganic plating and energy-reactive tendrils, they were capable of adapting in real time to damage. Weapons on board weren't just mounted. They were part of the ship, integrated into its biological framework, evolving as needed. It was said that some Zarov vessels weren't crewed at all. They were the crew, sentient constructs born from the Hive Empress's genetic design. Entire planetary systems had vanished in the wake of these armadas. When the Zarov came, they came not to negotiate or offer terms. Their presence was the final statement in a long line of galactic history, one that always ended the same way: submission, enslavement, or extinction. The Hive Empress herself, she was legend. None outside the Zarov had ever seen her and lived. She was more than a ruler. She was the mind behind the war machine, the queen of their psychic web, the architect of the Empire's rise. Her will shaped the stars. Her whispers could cause trillions to march in lockstep from one end of the galaxy to the other. There were rumors, of course, unverified reports from spies and doomed scholars that she possessed a consciousness that extended beyond physical dimensions. Some theorized she had outgrown her original body long ago and now resided in a field of consciousness tethered to the Hive network itself. But none of it mattered. Whatever form she took, her presence was undeniable. Every battle won, every city burned, every race bent to submission was because of her. The reign of the Zarov was more than a military conquest. It was psychological, cultural, existential. They didn't just defeat civilizations, they erased their uniqueness. After conquest, survivors were stripped of individuality. Minds reconditioned, languages erased, history rewritten. Those who were biologically compatible were genetically modified, plugged into the periphery of the hive and used as labor or fodder. Those who weren't, they became biological resources broken down into chemical components, repurposed into tools, fuel, or even ship matter. Entire species had ceased to exist, not because they had died, but because they had been absorbed so fully into the Zarov that they had no culture left to pass on. The galaxy, as it stood, was not a place of hope or progress. It was a dark age ruled by silence and fear. Communication networks that once spanned stars had gone dark. Borders shrank, trading routes collapsed. Scientific collaboration between species became taboo, many too afraid to draw attention to themselves. Smaller races huddled in shadow, whispering to one another of fallen empires, hiding their technological advances lest they provoke the Hive Empress's gaze. The Zarov had crushed the ambitious, the curious, the dreamers, because those were the ones who resisted the longest. And so, one by one, the stars grew quiet. It wasn't just the power of their fleets or the indestructibility of their soldiers. It was the inevitability of it all. The utter certainty that when the Zarov came, there was no escape. You could run, and they would catch you. You could hide, and they would find you. You could fight, and they would obliterate you, body, mind, and soul. And so it became the status quo. Civilizations stopped fighting. Some gave tribute. Others simply sent surrender signals preemptively, hoping to preserve a fragment of their population. Resistance was no longer honorable, it was suicidal. Generations grew up in the shadow of the Zarov. For them, slavery was not a horror, it was the only reality they'd ever known. But the Hive made one fatal mistake. It started with a signal just faint enough to be dismissed, just strange enough to be logged. Primitive emissions from an unremarkable system near the edge of the Orion Arm. Radio chatter, simple bursts of electromagnetic noise. Most thought it was the ghost of a long-dead species. Nothing important, but the Empress noticed something. Something different. The source was a blue-green planet circling a yellow star. A planet with tectonic instability, erratic weather systems, and biological diversity that bordered on chaos. The species living there were fragile, physically unimpressive, lacking in natural defenses. But their history was strange. They had evolved war not as a function of survival, but as a form of expression. They had fought each other for ideology, for land, for abstract principles. They had destroyed themselves and rebuilt again and again. And every time they got knocked down, they stood up harder, faster, angrier. In just a few thousand years, blink of an eye by galactic standards, they had gone from cave paintings to nuclear fission, from tribal myths to artificial intelligence, from flint knives to exploring neighboring worlds. What disturbed the Hive Empress wasn't just their pace of development. It was their unpredictability. In the Hive, all was order, purpose, clarity. But these humans, they thrived in chaos. They grew in adversity. They had no plan, and that made them dangerous. The Hive could adapt to threats. They could not adapt to madness. Still, the Zarov weren't afraid. Curiosity was not weakness. They had crushed stronger, older civilizations than this. It would be no different this time. The scouts were sent. Probes, analysis drones, cloaked observers. What they found confirmed the initial assumptions. The humans were bound to a single star system. Their weapons, while advancing, were crude compared to Zarov standards. Their spaceships were slow, lacking in shielding, vulnerable to ion disruption. And their societies fractured, often at odds with one another. divided by borders, creeds, even language. What dread could a race like that pose? The Empress ordered the beginning of pre-invasion protocols. The hive would absorb them. Their genetic templates could be useful. Their planet was rich in water and carbon-based life, excellent raw material. Resistance would be minimal. It would be over in days. Just another footnote in the long march of Zarov conquest. Just another species to be silenced. But she underestimated one thing. The one thing no drone, no psychic probe, no calculation in the hive's vast memory banks could predict. Human spirit. The hive Empress had already decided. Earth would fall, harvested or repurposed. Its natural resources refined into raw materials for the hive's ever-growing armadas. The Zarov had done this for millennia. One more world wouldn't change the order of things. Victory wasn't just expected, it was routine. Their fleet mobilized with the same silent coordination that had crushed 1,000 civilizations. The assault plans were drawn up. Weapons calibrated, infiltration drones deployed. Protocols initiated. But as the first wave of the Zarov fleet entered the outer boundaries of the solar system, something happened that didn't quite align with the usual script. The humans didn't panic. They didn't immediately send out desperate signals of surrender or grovel for mercy through primitive channels. They didn't descend into riots or chaos. In fact, they seemed calm, focused, unified. Within hours of detecting the Zarov incursion, human satellites reoriented themselves. Systems long believed obsolete were reactivated. Old Cold War-era defense networks came online, patched together across outdated frameworks. Yes, but online nonetheless. Not only that, but space stations above Earth, Mars, and even Jupiter's moons lit up with unusual power signatures, some of which didn't match anything the Zarov had seen from this species before. This was not how the hive remembered prey behaving. Even odder, human communications across the planet changed overnight. Previously fractured and divided by nations, ideologies, and old grievances, global leaders began appearing on joint broadcasts. Messages were no longer aimed at their own citizens, but directed at the planet as a whole. Across news channels, military feeds, and encrypted darknets, a single message echoed: "We will not go quietly." In the hive Empress's throne chamber, floating in the gravityless, darkened core of her command vessel, she felt it a ripple, a flicker of something alien, defiance. The humans weren't just preparing to defend themselves. They were preparing to fight back. Unusual, she thought, but not threatening. Curious, perhaps, but not significant. The Empress doubled the assault force. The hive's carriers emerged from subspace like steel nightmares. The skies above Earth darkened with the arrival of Zarov warships, each the size of a city block, bristling with weapons capable of turning terrain to glass. Swarms of smaller drones and atmospheric fighters accompanied them, buzzing through the clouds like locusts before a harvest. It should have been the end. The moment the Zarov fleet reached Earth orbit, they expected capitulation. They expected humans to break, as every other species had done when confronted with the sheer enormity of the hive. Instead, the first thing they saw was a barrage of high-speed railgun fire from orbital platforms that, according to all previous scans, weren't even armed. The projectiles weren't exotic. They didn't need to be. Simple, magnetically accelerated slugs punched through Zarov's shielding at hypersonic speeds. A dozen assault drones exploded before they reached lower atmosphere. Dozens more followed. It took less than 30 seconds for the first hive commander to realize something was terribly wrong. The humans had weapons the hive hadn't detected, and they knew how to use them. On the ground, General Elena Rodriguez stood in the command center of the newly unified Earth Defense Network, eyes locked on a rotating display of the enemy fleet. Her voice was calm, precise, authoritative. All rail batteries fire at will. Prioritize the large landing carriers. Interceptor wings launch now. And someone get me status on Operation Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt is live, her second-in-command, Colonel Tanaka, replied. Hidden silos all over the globe are hot. Railgun matrix is synced. Rodriguez nodded. Across Earth, hidden beneath civilian buildings, mountains, and oceans, decades of secret projects came online. In the Nevada desert, a silo opened silently beneath what looked like an abandoned warehouse. In Siberia, under layers of snow and ice, an ancient Soviet complex rumbled to life. In South Africa, in the shadow of Table Mountain, weapons never officially acknowledged took aim skyward. The humans had been preparing for this, not just for years, but for generations. Their governments hadn't trusted each other, but they'd all agreed on one thing. If the stars ever came knocking, they had to be ready. Above, Zarov dropships pierced the stratosphere, trailing fire. Dozens more followed. Then the sky screamed. Railguns tore through their ranks, dropping massive carriers in flames over the Pacific. In low orbit, human fighter craft, hopelessly outgunned, used guerrilla tactics, ambushing Zarov drones from behind debris fields, using the remnants of destroyed satellites as improvised cover. The hive expected orderly formations and predictable movements. Instead, they got something much worse. They got improvisation. They got audacity. And on Earth's, in the streets of New York, Lagos, and Tokyo, the first landing troops encountered not civilians fleeing in terror, but hastily organized militias. Armed with everything from scavenged alien plasma rifles to 20th-century assault weapons, human fighters used their home advantage to stage brutal ambushes. They fought from rooftops, subways, sewers. They fought dirty. They fought hard. In the canyon cities of Iran and the highlands of Peru, the terrain itself worked against the invaders. Zarov walkers, built for open engagements, found themselves trapped between narrow walls and craggy slopes. Explosives planted days earlier went off in synchronized waves, crippling their mobility. Still, despite their initial losses, the hive pushed forward. More dropships came, more warriors, and slowly, inevitably, the cities began to fall. One by one, Zarov footholds were established. Massive energy domes sealed off entire urban centers, turning New Delhi, Paris, and Mexico City into occupied zones. On the oceans, hive carriers deployed aquatic drones to secure vital shipping lanes. In orbit, humanity's fleet was all but gone, sacrificed to buy time. From any rational perspective, the situation was dire. But humanity didn't think in rational terms. In the underground labs of Colorado, bunkers beneath Berlin, and sealed facilities in Nigeria, engineers and scientists worked around the clock to study every scrap of captured alien tech. They tore apart damaged Zarov weapons. They mapped the fields generated by energy barriers. They recorded shield resonance frequencies and traced psionic field signatures. And in Abuja, Dr. Aisha Okafor, physicist, engineer, insurgent, made the discovery that changed everything. Their weapons, she explained, relied on plasma containment fields oscillating at fixed frequencies. They're elegant, she said, but rigid. If we push the right kind of interference through the right channel, we can cause catastrophic failure. Chain reactions. They won't just stop firing, their guns will explode in their hands. "Can you build a prototype?" General Rodriguez asked her via quantum-encrypted uplink. "I can build 5, O'Keefer answered. "But I need 48 hours. She got 36. The Hive had no idea what hit them. At dawn, as Zarov forces prepared their final push to break the remaining human resistance, the new tech was deployed. Tiny disruptor devices built from scavenged components were hidden in backpacks, planted near battle lines, or launched in miniature drones that buzzed into enemy positions. The result? Chaos. Weapons fizzled. Plasma casters exploded. Entire squads were wiped out by their own gear. The Hive had never faced this before, technology being turned against them in real time. It wasn't just sabotage, it was rebellion. In the ruins of London, a ragtag company of fighters led by Captain James Holloway launched a full frontal assault on a Zarov bunker, using nothing but scavenged gear and doughy rifles. Under normal conditions, they would have been vaporized in seconds, but the disruptor had already done its work. By the time the Zarov realized their firepower was neutralized, it was too late. They were cut down, one by human fighters who no longer feared them, and they weren't alone. In Brazil, guerrilla fighters used drones made from drone racing components to infiltrate enemy supply drops. In northern Canada, Inuit warriors took down towering alien walkers with steel cables and explosives. In Tokyo, martial artists armed with repurposed alien blades fought side by side with cybernetic engineers and retired police officers. The Hive watched as their perfect plan unraveled. The Empress herself, orbiting in her flagship on the dark side of the moon, reached out into the psychic web of the Hive. She expected unity. She expected triumph. Instead, she felt fear, not just from the humans but from her own. For the first time in generations, the Hive hesitated. And for the first time in living memory, the Empress knew what it was to be unsure. The war wasn't won yet, not even close. Cities still burned, alien ships still patrolled the skies. Entire regions of Earth remained under heavy occupation. But something fundamental had changed. Something irreversible. For the first time since the Zarov entered the Sol system, they weren't advancing. They were adjusting. They were responding. And worse for them, they were beginning to react emotionally. For a species that prided itself on unflinching unity, dictated entirely by the Hive Empress's psychic command, this shift was unprecedented. Before, when resistance had emerged on other worlds, it was met with overwhelming force, complete suppression, and immediate reabsorption of dissent. But on Earth, nothing was behaving according to the script. The humans weren't acting like prey. And now, they had teeth. Dr. Aisha O'Keefe's breakthrough had changed the landscape of war overnight. Using a blend of reverse-engineered Zarov tech and some old-world signal theory, she and her team had managed to create small, rugged devices capable of disrupting the energy frequencies in Zarov weapon systems. The effect wasn't just interference, it caused chain reactions inside the power cells. In the field, this meant one thing. Zarov guns exploded in the hands of their own soldiers. The first field tests had been promising. The second batch, devastating. Entire squads of Zarov troops were wiped out by their own armaments before they could fire a single shot. Worse for them, the disruptions created pockets of localized chaos in the Hive mind. When a unit was decimated, the psychic shockwaves reverberated across the collective consciousness. The Hive, so conditioned to seamless operation and predictable inputs, began to crack under the unpredictable emotional feedback. Fear, confusion, doubt. None of those belonged in the Hive. And yet they began to spread like a virus. From the ruins of cities across the globe, Resistance fighters emerged from hiding with new weapons in hand. Crude by Zarov standards, but no longer outmatched. They'd learned to wait for the right moment, when the disruptors pulsed, when the alien weapons sparked and fizzled, then strike hard and fast. Battles once hopelessly one-sided became fierce, dynamic struggles. Victories once impossible became common. But humanity wasn't just getting lucky. They were learning. Every skirmish, every captured device, every downed alien craft provided data, material, and insight. And nowhere was that transformation more visible than in the hidden bunkers of the United Earth Defense Command. Beneath a mountain range in what used to be Switzerland, Elena Rodriguez stood over a circular command table, studying holographic updates from 6 continents. Cities once blacked out were blinking back online. Enemy troop concentrations were retreating to their hardened domes. In some sectors, Zarov activity had gone completely dark, retreating into defensive posture for the first time in centuries. Still, she didn't smile. "We've turned a corner," said Colonel Akira Tanaka at her side. "But they'll adapt. They always do," Elena muttered. "Which is why we're going to stay one step ahead." Across the table, Dr. O'Kafer connected via secure uplink, her face illuminated by the soft green glow of lab screens behind her. "I have something," she said without preamble. "Something big, but it's dangerous." That got Elena's attention. "Go on." "We've been studying not just their hardware, but their hive communications. Every unit is connected through some form of quantum psychic link, managed and modulated by the Empress herself. We can't sever that connection, but we think we can infiltrate it, temporarily, subtly." Tanaka raised an eyebrow. "You want to hack their minds?" "No," Aisha replied. "I want to listen to them." A pause. "Project Whisper," she continued. "We've reverse-engineered parts of a downed comms array from a hive cruiser outside Nairobi. With the right quantum tuning, we can pick up low-frequency background chatter from the hive network. Not command-level input, just tactical noise, data packets, localized signals. You want to spy on the hive like we would on an enemy radio net," Elena said slowly. "Yes. And if it works, we can intercept real-time movements, predict deployments, and even identify when and where they're panicking. And if it fails, they detect us. They retaliate. They might even trace it back and fry our entire system in one psychic sweep." Silence settled over the war room like a blanket. Elena turned to her staff. Her voice was firm. "Do it." In an underground lab hidden beneath the decimated remains of the University of Nairobi, Aisha and her team worked around the clock. Engineers tuned frequency converters with surgical precision. Quantum neuralists ran simulations across parallel processor networks. Psychologists consulted on psychic shielding protocols. Everyone knew the risk, but no one backed down. Within days, the first successful intercept came through. Faint, distorted more like whispers in static, but unmistakably Zarov. They were worried. The humans were spreading. Too fast. Too unpredictably. They couldn't pin them down. Couldn't isolate their leadership. Couldn't even understand their tactics. Earth's defenses were no longer centralized. They were organic, adaptive, wild. Hive logic didn't account for that. And now humanity knew it. From there, the war began to shift like a tide turning under moonlight. Armed with real-time Zarov communications data, resistance forces around the globe began launching preemptive strikes. Where once they fought in desperation, now they hunted. They laid ambushes for patrols before the aliens even arrived. They detonated caches just as convoys passed. In one extraordinary mission, A resistance cell in Germany collapsed a mountain pass moments before a heavy Meech unit advanced, cutting off supplies to 3 hive-controlled cities. Project Whisper had worked, but it had also drawn attention. The Hive Empress, perched on her throne in a fortress-sized flagship orbiting Neptune, felt it the moment Whisper cracked the outer shell of her psychic domain. It was like a tickle, a scratch on a door she hadn't realized existed. She lashed out, a wave of pure psychic energy coursing through the network, seeking out the source of intrusion. But Aisha was ready. She had built a firewall unlike anything the Hive had ever encountered. Not in hardware, but in will. It wasn't made of code or circuitry. It was built from people, hundreds of volunteers who opened their minds, anchoring the intercept system with their collective emotions, thoughts, memories, pain, hope, rage, faith, all wired into the system, all focused on one thing: resisting the Empress. When she struck, the psychic backlash was enormous. But it didn't destroy Whisper. It stunned the Hive. For a few critical minutes, entire Zarov units lost contact with the network. Officers froze. Troopers stood motionless. Some screamed shrill, high-pitched screeches that shattered windows and made birds drop from the sky. And for the first time in the war, Zarov forces retreated. The world exploded with hope. Everywhere, the signal to rise came at once. Militias hidden in the catacombs of Paris surged forward. Farmers turned fighters in rural India ambushed a Hive transport using repurposed irrigation drones. In Mexico, a street gang turned freedom fighters used retrofitted lowriders to outrun and destroy an alien scouting column. It was a counter-offensive like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. In the skies above Earth, something even more astonishing happened. A new fleet appeared. Not alien, not Hive, but human. For months, in secret dry docks built in the shadows of Earth's last major industrial centers, humans had been building salvaged parts from downed alien craft, repurposed satellite components, fusion cores pulled from melted bunkers. Engineers had poured every ounce of innovation into crafting ships, not elegant, but functional, armed, ready. BSF's Defiant, a towering angular vessel armored with scrap and creativity, led the charge. Alongside it flew nearly 24 other ships, smaller, faster, but just as determined. They launched from hidden bases in Africa, Australia, Antarctica, anywhere the Hive wasn't looking. And they hit hard. Caught between a psychic disruption and a surprise orbital fleet, the Zarov flinched. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough to shift the balance. Yet amidst the chaos, something even more unexpected occurred. On the battlefield outside Shanghai, a single Zarov warrior broke ranks. She didn't run. She didn't fight. She walked toward human lines, alone. Her name, as she would later offer through an interpreter, was Zik-Era, a mid-level combat tactician cut off from the Hive during the Whisper event. And for the first time in her life, she had been forced to think for herself, to choose, and she chose to surrender. In exchange for protection, she offered Intel Zarov communication maps, vulnerability data, Empress patterns. Many thought it was a trap, but Elena Rodriguez saw something else. A crack, a seam in the armor. If one can break free, she said to her team, others can too. Her gamble paid off. Zik-Era proved not only cooperative but invaluable. Her insights allowed human forces to strike high-value command centers. More than that, her defection sent shockwaves through the Hive. Some Zarov began to question, to hesitate. A few followed her lead, choosing exile over blind obedience. It was unthinkable. unprecedented, and yet undeniable. For the first time, the Hive Empress felt fear. Not of death, not of defeat, but of change. What she had built, what had endured across eons, was no longer unshakable. The humans had done the impossible. They had adapted faster than she could react. They had broken the unbreakable. They had made her empire bleed. The Hive Empress was losing control, and she knew it. Not in the sense that her fleet had been destroyed or her soldiers routed. No, the machinery of war still functioned. The great Hive ship still loomed in orbit. Zarov warriors still patrolled the occupied zones of Earth. From the outside, the Zarov Empire looked as solid and fearsome as it always had. But inside, the fractures had begun. The enemy, the humans, had done something no other species had managed in millennia. Not just resist, not even just fight back. They had started to change the very nature of the war. They had turned a linear conquest into a chaotic, unpredictable conflict. And worst of all, they had found their way into the Hive. It began with a project codenamed Whisper, a seemingly impossible idea to tap into the low-frequency chatter of the Zarov hive mind without being detected. Dr. Aisha Okafor, the Nigerian physicist whose earlier breakthroughs had already crippled Zarov energy weapons, had taken the lead. Working with a hand-picked team of engineers, psych-tech specialists, and neurobiologists, she had reverse-engineered a downed Zarov communication node and created a one-of-a-kind listening system. But Whisper wasn't just hardware. It required something more, something that no AI or synthetic could replicate. It needed people. The system ran on human consciousness, specifically human emotion. Volunteers were recruited from around the world. Soldiers, survivors, trauma counselors, monks, even children. Anyone whose mind could hold strong emotional signals without fracturing. Their thoughts were used as shields, their memories as signal stabilizers. It was the most insane and human approach possible, weaponizing raw willpower to infiltrate a psychic network designed to suppress it. And it worked. Whisper allowed Earth Command to listen in on Zarov troop coordination, location markers, and even glimpses of what they felt, though feeling in a hive context was more instinct than emotion. Still, patterns emerged. Anxiety among patrol units, static bursts from disrupted sectors, delays in orders where there should have been none. The hive was responding, not directing. The Empress reacted quickly, lashing out through the network in a massive psionic sweep designed to purge whatever had infected her mind. It was a brutal wave of mental pressure that should have collapsed any organic system trying to ride her signal. But Aisha had planned for that. At the center of Whisper, embedded into the system's psychic loop, was something completely outside the Empress's understanding. The collective human spirit. What met her psychic strike was not code or tech, but a mental firewall made of raw emotion: anger, love, guilt, hope, grief, hope, grief. Hundreds of minds linked together in shared resistance. The Empress felt the weight of it. It didn't compute. It wasn't logical. It was wild, erratic, uncontrollable, and utterly impenetrable. She recoiled. For the first time in her existence, she was pushed back, and that shockwave had consequences. All across Earth, Zarov troops began to stagger. Some screamed, clawing at the sides of their helmets. Others froze, twitching, their bodies fighting two instincts: obey or survive. The command link had fractured for a few short minutes, but those minutes were enough. Human forces struck. Coordinated attacks erupted across occupied cities. Zarov patrols were ambushed mid-transmission. Barricades fell. Supply chains collapsed. It wasn't just tactical victory, it was psychological warfare at its most primal. The Invincible were now vulnerable. And the ripples didn't stop there. Something else happened. Something no one on Earth had expected. A Zarov soldier defected. It happened in the devastated outskirts of Shanghai. A special forces unit known as Echo 9 had been conducting hit-and-run attacks on a Zarov staging zone. On their third pass, they were preparing explosives when they spotted movement near the edge of the zone. Not enemy reinforcements, just one, a single Zarov trooper, unarmed. Walking toward them, the human soldiers froze. No one moved, no one fired. It wasn't a tactic. There was no cover, no flanking force, no drone backup. The creature simply stood there, exposed, as if daring them to shoot or begging them not to. The trooper extended her arms in a strange, deliberate movement, palms facing upward, and then, slowly, she lowered herself to one knee. A full minute passed before Echo 9 moved in. She didn't resist. When their translator drone booted up, she gave a single phrase that sent shockwaves all the way to Earth Command. "I do not wish to return to the hive." Her name, or at least the name she claimed for herself, was Zikara. She explained, with some difficulty, that the psychic feedback from Whisper had severed her from the hive for just long enough to make her aware. Independent thought, she said, was painful, confusing, terrifying, but also liberating. She no longer wanted to obey. She wanted to choose. Some at Earth Command feared a trap, that she was bait for an ambush or an experimental vector for psychic sabotage. But Rodriguez made the call. She let Zikara speak, and what she revealed changed everything. Zikara wasn't special, not in the way one might think. She hadn't been a leader, or a genetic anomaly. She had been an average trooper, but that was precisely why her defection was important. Because if it could happen to her, it could happen to any of them. The Zarov Empire hadn't just taken physical control of the galaxy, they'd reprogrammed it. They'd reshaped the very way their people thought, or rather, didn't think. The hive eliminated questions, individual desires, and doubt. But Whisper had cracked that shell. It had introduced interference into the psychic field, and with it came possibility. And possibility was contagious. Within days of Zikara's surrender, 2 more low-ranking Zarov soldiers were found wandering, disoriented and confused, near the Caucasus Mountains. A week later, an entire scout team failed to return from patrol and turned up instead at a human refugee camp in northern Australia, asking for asylum. By month's end, dozens had broken away. They called themselves Echoed, a poetic mistranslation, perhaps, but fitting. They were the echoes of their former selves, fragments once buried beneath the hive's oppressive unity, now trying to find their own voices. Not all humans welcomed them. Many called for execution, claiming it was a trick or a long con by the Empress. Others saw it as an abomination, a blending of predator and prey. But Elena Rodriguez saw the future. If they're willing to change, she said, before the council, then we must be willing to let them. Her decision to grant Zikara and the Echoed asylum was controversial, but it was right. The Echoed didn't just bring peace offerings. They brought knowledge, combat formations, supply lines, weaknesses in the hive's armor, the exact bandwidths of psychic channels, the location of the Empress's flagship in the outer system. Most crucially, they brought insight. They explained how the Hive Empress thought, how she expected her enemies to behave, how she controlled through instinct, not discipline. She didn't adapt, she overpowered. She didn't strategize, she assumed superiority. and now that assumption had become her greatest liability. Earth Command launched a new phase of the war. Codenamed Starlight, it combined everything learned from Whisper and the Echoed. Coordinated guerrilla strikes, artificial psychic noise bombs, and information warfare campaigns designed to sow chaos inside the hive. Entire human units disguised themselves as rogue Zarov and inserted themselves into enemy territory. Broadcasts in Zarov psychic frequencies echoed doubts and conflicting orders. Where the hive had once spoken with one voice, now came whispers. And where once unity had been their greatest strength, now it became a weakness. Confusion spread. Small cracks became chasms. In the ice fields of Siberia, a Zarov garrison turned on itself, half the troops believing they'd received an order to retreat, the other half demanding they hold position. In Kenya, a hive dome collapsed not from bombardment but from internal sabotage. In orbit, a skirmish between two Zarov cruisers ended in disaster after both misinterpreted a shared command string. Humanity was inside the machine, and they were rewiring it. For the Empress, this was untenable. She had never needed to change, never had to adapt. Her empire had been absolute, but now, her thoughts were no longer sacred. Her commands no longer absolute. She lashed out. Mass psychic pulses ravaged the echoed enclaves. Some were destroyed, some took their own lives, overwhelmed by guilt and confusion. Others survived, stronger for it. But the message was clear. The Empress was angry. She was also afraid. And so, she prepared her final gambit. A total planetary purge. She would cleanse the infection once and for all. But humanity was ready. They had the Echoed. They had Whisper. And more than that, they had something the hive never did. Free will. The war for Earth had started with a whisper. Now it thundered. In the days following, Project Whisper's breakthrough, and the unexpected defection of Zikara and the Echoed, Earth's fractured nations found themselves united in purpose, like never before. What had once been a desperate fight for survival had become a calculated push for victory. The impossible was no longer a dream, it was a plan. General Elena Rodriguez stood inside the Unified Earth Defense Command's central war room, deep beneath the Andes. Dozens of holographic displays floated above the round tactical table maps of Zarov activity, planetary weather patterns, orbital flight paths, intercept telemetry. She traced her finger across one section. Western Europe, where resistance cells had begun to reclaim key urban zones with startling speed. Across from her, Colonel Akira Tanaka nodded toward the global feed. "It's working," he said. "The Zarov can't keep up. Every time they adapt, we're already 3 moves ahead." Elena didn't smile. She rarely did anymore, not until it was over. But deep down, she felt it too. The shift, the turning of the tide. Whisper was running at full capacity now, decrypting psychic traffic across all hemispheres. Human command teams received near real-time data on Zarov movements, anticipating patrols, decoding strategic deployments, tracking energy output signatures before weapons were even fired. Coupled with the growing intelligence from Zikara and other Echoed defectors, Earth's forces were gaining a clarity that even the Empress couldn't comprehend. The Zarov hive mind, once flawless, was becoming a liability. Without direct guidance from the Empress, isolated Zarov units faltered. Delays in decision-making, conflicting orders, emotional disturbances. Earth had succeeded in introducing chaos into a species built on unity, and humanity knew chaos better than anyone. In the skies above New Delhi, a formation of human spacefighters punched through the atmosphere. their sleek black hulls cutting against the morning sun. The lead ship, marked with a white phoenix emblem, bore the call sign Valkyrie 1. Inside the cockpit, Wing Commander Raj Patel checked his targeting matrix as new telemetry streamed in from Whisper's AI interface. He smiled to himself. "They're gonna zig left," he said to no one in particular. Seconds later, the Zarov attack wing veered hard left. Raj's voice crackled across the comm channel. "Foxtrot pattern, echo drift, hit 'em clean." His squad peeled off in perfect coordination. Where once humanity's fighter craft had been hopelessly outmatched, now they flew like aces, anticipating every enemy move before it happened. Weapons locked, missiles launched. One by one, the Zarov fighters lit up the sky as they spiraled toward the ground. Zikara's insights had proven invaluable. She had explained how the Hive prioritized targets, how they interpreted formation movement, how they failed to respond properly when separated from squad-based psychic input. Earth's pilots used it all like martial artists studying a rigid opponent. The more predictable the Zarov were, the faster they fell. On the ground, the counter-offensive surged forward. In the Amazon rainforest, small teams of indigenous warriors led combined strike squads through overgrown foliage, ambushing Zarov patrols at choke points mapped generations ago by their ancestors. Poison-tipped darts dipped in rare neurotoxins paralyzed even armored Hive troopers long enough for machete or bullet to finish the job. In the frozen wastes of Siberia, Russian and Chinese troops, former enemies, now bonded in blood-laid explosive traps beneath frozen rivers. When the Zarov mechs advanced, the ice cracked, the charges went off, and the towering walkers plunged into freezing black water. Survivors were picked off with heavy rifles and explosive javelins. In subways beneath Paris, teenagers armed with modified mining drones and reprogrammed Zarov scout bots created mobile MP bombs that knocked out entire enemy comms arrays. Everywhere the war was fought, Earth hit back. And everywhere the Zarov expected humans to falter, they instead grew bolder. The turning point came 3 weeks after Whisper went fully operational, Operation Iron Pulse. It was bold, some said insane. The objective: hit a central Zarov command dome in Munich, one of the largest strongholds outside the capital occupation zone. Heavily fortified, covered by orbital surveillance, protected by automated defense grids, but it had one weakness: overconfidence. The Empress believed no humans would dare strike a command corps head-on. She assumed they would continue skirmishes, nibbling at the edges. She didn't expect a full-scale raid with AI-predicted attack vectors, echoed guides leading the infiltration, and drone interference programmed in the exact psionic frequency that triggered confusion among Zarov guards. The mission was led by Captain James Holloway, the hero of the London Resistance, now outfitted with a combat suit laced with salvaged Hive armor and shield disruptors. Holloway and his team infiltrated Munich through the underground sewer systems, with echoed commandos clearing the upper corridors and looping psychic interference into the dome's systems. By the time the Zarov realized what was happening, Holloway was standing in the control chamber planting thermal charges. 20 minutes later, the dome was gone. It collapsed inward like a dying star imploding in a flash of bioreactive plasma. The blast was seen from space. For the first time, a core Hive structure had been taken out by humans. The message was clear. Earth wasn't just resisting. It was fighting to win. The Empress reeled. In her throne chamber aboard her colossal flagship, floating just beyond Mars' orbit, her psychic tendrils twitched and curled like wounded nerves. What once had been cold confidence now felt brittle, stretched thin. For centuries she had ruled with utter certainty, never adapting, because she'd never needed to. But these humans were changing the rules. Every loss fed their momentum. Every retreat gave them another chance to evolve. And then came something that truly shook her. The Echoed were growing in number. What started as a dozen, then a few dozen, became hundreds. A splintered network of defectors who no longer obeyed the hive, who were learning to think, feel, even form relationships outside of their biological directive. The hive had no precedent for this. Never before had loyalty fractured in this way. Some Echoed chose to join human resistance groups directly. Others asked only for a chance to live free, to find their own meaning beyond conquest. A few began teaching human scientists how to interface with Zarov tech, not just to destroy it, but to repurpose it. In one lab, a former hive engineer helped design a hybrid spacecraft engine that used Zarov jump coils tuned through Whisper's signal scrambler, giving humanity faster-than-light capability for the first time. The Empress responded with fury. Mass psychic strikes blanketed the planet. Anywhere the Echoed gathered, she tried to burn them out, flooding their minds with waves of guilt, fear, and pain. Some pain collapsed. Some turned violent. Others simply disappeared. But the effort cost her. Each time she unleashed a pulse, the backlash from Whisper hit harder. Earth's psychic defense grid, anchored now by thousands of human volunteers, rebounded the attacks like a mirror. The strain of maintaining total control while fighting off invasive signals weakened her grip on the outer hive sectors. Zarov command chains began to fragment. Entire units acted on instinct rather than instruction. Some began making mistakes, and that's when Earth launched its boldest plan yet, Operation Starfall, a full-scale orbital assault targeting the Zarov fleet anchored in the asteroid belt, and the Empress's personal flagship in deep orbit. Led by the newly christened SF's Defiant, Earth's first fully human-made capital warship, the fleet jumped from hidden dry docks across the planet. Sleek, angular, ugly by hive standards, but deadly. The Defiant was crewed by a joint force of humans and Echoed. At the helm was Captain Yuki Tanaka, Akira's daughter, and one of Earth's best tactical minds. Her ship moved with terrifying grace, built on lessons learned from Hive AI targeting systems and battle reflex algorithms. "Execute maneuver theta," she said as the fleet emerged from subspace. Earth's ships broke formation immediately, scattering in what looked like chaos until the Hive realized it wasn't. It was a trap. The Zarov formations attempted to respond, but Earth's Whisper-linked AI predicted their shifts within milliseconds. Fire control teams aboard the Defiant landed direct hits on shield junctions before the Zarov even fully powered them. One after another, Hive carriers went dark, their systems overwhelmed by energy overloads or cascade feedback loops. Then came the final stroke. A stealth team, led once again by Holloway, infiltrated the Empress's flagship. Their mission: plant a device that Aisha OK for herself had designed, a phase-inverted jump disruptor that would render the fleet stranded in real space, cut off from reinforcements. The battle in the corridors of the Hive ship was brutal. Zarov warriors surged like demons, their armor flashing in the low light. Holloway and his team fought with precision, every step guided by predictive overlays and Echoed scouts. At the heart of the ship, their tech prodigy, Zora, wired the disruptor into the primary energy vein. "It's live!" she yelled as plasma bursts filled the chamber. They barely escaped, but the result was spectacular. The Hive fleet began to fall out of the sky. Zarov jump drives collapsed. locking their ships into real space. With reinforcements stranded and communications jammed by whisper, Earth's fleet circled and delivered the final blows. And in that moment, with fire blooming across the stars, the Empress sent a signal, not for vengeance, not for another wave. For surrender, the galaxy had never seen anything like it. The Zarov, conquerors of systems, devourers of resistance, architects of unbroken war, swooned for peace. Earth didn't celebrate with cheers or arrogance. The war had taken too much, too many lost, too many cities burned. But they had done what no species before them had managed. They had made the impossible real. They had fought gods and won. The war was over. The Zarov had surrendered. After centuries of terror, after world had been consumed under the shadow of their hive ships, it had ended not with the thunder of weapons or a final destructive blow, but with something even more profound, a choice. The Empress, unbreakable, unfathomable, had chosen to cease fire, and in doing so, she shattered the illusion that her kind were gods. Humanity stood battered, bruised, and bloodied, but alive. Against all odds, they had done what no other race had dared attempt. They had survived the impossible, pushed back the darkness, and changed the very nature of the galaxy. But survival was only the beginning. Now came something far more difficult: rebuilding. In the weeks following the ceasefire, Earth began emerging from its bunkers, its strongholds, its craters and rubble. Cities rose again, scarred but standing. Some looked almost as they had before. Others were reshaped entirely, rebuilt with hybrid designs that merged human construction with reclaimed Zarov tech. Towering glass domes gleamed beside rough concrete walls. Fields were irrigated by repurposed hive drones. Damaged satellites were restored and relaunched, this time with human-crewed beacons sharing Earth's story with the stars. A single phrase echoed through the transmission: "We endured, we changed. So can you." General Elena Rodriguez, now Earth's representative on the newly formed Galactic Council, stood aboard Harmony Station, a massive orbital habitat that circled the planet in a precise, steady arc. It had been built from the remains of destroyed hive ships, stitched together with parts from Earth's first orbital shipyards. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. From her vantage point, she could see hundreds of ships arriving and departing. Vessels of all shapes and sizes, some bearing symbols of long-lost civilizations, others arriving in tentative friendship. And alongside them, Zarov. But not as conquerors, not anymore. Now they came as something else: refugees, diplomats, students, allies. Rodriguez sipped her tea slowly and turned to the person standing beside her, Dr. Aisha Okafor. The woman who had built Whisper, who had turned science and spirit into Earth's ultimate shield. "You ever think we'd end up here?" Rodriguez asked softly. Okafor smiled without looking away from the stars. "Not once, but I hoped." That hope had become contagious. Across the galaxy, species that had once hidden in the dark now stepped into the light. Once isolated worlds opened channels of communication. Trade began. Dialogue emerged. Old enemies discovered shared traumas and common ground. Earth's, once a forgotten backwater, had become a catalyst, a symbol that even the smallest species could spark a galactic revolution. But peace was not without its challenges. Back on Earth, debates raged. Some believed the victory over the Zarov meant it was time to build a human empire, to claim the vacuum left by the broken hive, to establish dominance while the others were still reeling. Others believed humanity should retreat, fortify Earth, isolate itself from further conflict. let the galaxy sort itself out while the homeworld recovered. But Rodriguez and her council pushed for a third-path cooperation. "We didn't win this war with bigger guns," she said in her first address to the council. "We won with empathy, with will, with the courage to imagine something better than fear. Earth became a leader not through conquest, but through example." Human engineers shared medical and communication advancements with recovering worlds. Former resistance fighters trained peacekeepers. Survivors helped other species navigate the complex emotional process of post-conflict healing. Earth's embassies opened on 20 new planets within the first galactic year, and in every one of them, the first words on the wall were the same. "We are not what you feared. We are what you became." The Zarov, meanwhile, were undergoing a transformation far more radical than any species had ever experienced. With their hive mind fragmented, individual Zarov were left alone for the first time. Many collapsed, mentally or physically, unable to cope with the absence of collective purpose. Some turned violent. Others simply went still, unresponsive, waiting for a signal that would never return. But some, like Zikara, flourished. She became a symbol of a new movement within the Zarov ranks. Not a rebellion, not a revolution, a reformation. "We conquered because we knew no other way," she said during her first public address to both humans and aliens on Harmony Station. "We were programmed to serve, to win, to absorb. But now we are awake." Her voice echoed in chambers once filled with fear. "Now we choose." The Echoed, as they still called themselves, established educational enclaves on neutral planets. There, former hive warriors were taught language, culture, ethics, creativity. The same creativity the Empress had once feared so deeply in humanity. Some Zarov struggled, some resisted. A few still clung to the old ways, forming isolated militant cults that declared humanity's victory a fluke. But for every one of them, a dozen more embraced change. The Empress herself remained, silent, still alive, still in orbit, cloistered inside the remnants of her broken flagship. She spoke only once more. It was a private transmission, sent directly to Rodriguez and Okafor, a flickering image. Her once glowing form dimmed, her voice no longer proud but pained. "You showed us," she said, "what we could be, what we feared, what we refused to become." Then she disconnected. She was never heard from again. Some said she died. Others believed she faded into the psychic void, disconnected herself from the hive entirely. But her empire, the one forged in blood and fear, was gone. Years passed, decades even. On the far edges of what used to be Zarov space, a small agricultural colony was founded. Not by humans, not by Zarov, but by both. A man named Miguel, a former resistance mechanic, settled there alongside a young Zarov named Katie, one of the first Echoed born outside the hive. Together, they grew crops, taught local children, and helped build a school that taught both Terran and hive history side by side. And in the middle of that classroom stood a plaque. "Truth grows in the space where fear used to live." One day, standing on the observation deck of Harmony Station, Rodriguez watched as a group of children, human, Zarov, and other species, ran past her, laughing in a dozen different tongues. Some carried model ships. Others carried old weapons turned into toys. She turned to Aisha, still at her side after all these years. "You think they'll remember?" Aisha's gaze followed the children as they disappeared around a corner. "They won't remember the war," she said softly. "But they'll remember what it taught us. And that was enough." Epilogue. A lesson for us somewhere across time and space. This story echoes not just in the stars, but here on Earth. Because it's not just science fiction, it's a reflection, a parable. The tale of the Zarov and humanity's struggle wasn't about aliens or weapons or technology. It was about something far older and more human. Control versus freedom, fear versus hope, uniformity versus creativity. It was a reminder that even the most powerful systems can fall to the smallest voice of defiance. That empathy is not weakness. It's the engine of survival. That resilience doesn't come from strength alone, but from the willingness to adapt, to dream, to change. We live in a world right now facing divisions, uncertainty, rising fear. But maybe, just maybe, if we remember the story of a species who stood together when the sky darkened, who turned pain into purpose, and who forged peace not through dominance but through understanding, we'll already have won the most important one, inside ourselves.